What's up with the Anunnaki? I'm about to tell you a story so true it repeats on every level of reality. Three-Eye Atlas, aliens, the gods. If you don't want to be on the hook for this information, you better scroll. What are you doing to us, right? The wounds of a friend are faithful. Richard Dawkins says we are all atheists about most of the gods that humanity has ever believed in. Some of us just go one god further. You got a bunch of mice in your pockets, sir? While modern academia maintains that this is man's feeble attempt to explain the natural forces he experiences in life, I'd say, what difference does that actually make? The forces are real, right? But they're not intelligent and personified, you might say. Men did this, did we? You sure about that? The whole story here from the ancient Sumerians, the first civilization, they claimed that these immortal beings came from the heavens and taught them everything about civilization. Well, that's preposterous, academia says. Not coincides directly with how history began after such a long period of prehistory. Just all of a sudden, like. And that first civilization, Sumer, made attempts, no matter how feeble they be. They could barely write. They were scratching cuneiform on clay tablets and baking it in the oven, bro. They didn't even have paper. This was their attempt to explain how mankind and civilization began. They have wings, they look like angels. Funny you should mention that. Most people think we can't see heaven at all and that angels are invisible. And the fact that people so easily reject these ideas, though they be so obvious and simple, would hurt my feelings if I had any left on the subject. We understand that bacteria are life forms so small that we can't see them with our eyes, except we use an instrument to see them for us. Why is it so hard to understand that stars are life forms in heaven, unimaginably larger than we are? You would have to be on the surface of a star to truly understand its immensity, at which point you could no longer properly comprehend it. All things being relative anyway. We can believe that bacteria are life forms, but not that stars are alive. I maintain that the evidence of life is metabolism, and that metabolism is evidence of consciousness, and that magnetic fields are evidence of metabolism. Now, the fact that stars are life forms is rejected because they don't eat or procreate. I would argue that immortal life forms don't have to eat, they're immortal. How does this make sense according to the laws of physics? Well, their metabolism is inherent. The fuel that they need to consume, they already have. They don't have to gather it from outside sources like we do down here on Earth where things die and are not immortal. What need is there to pass on your progeny if you're immortal? The Bible says angels neither marry nor are they given in marriage, and we do observe this of the stars. And we use it to disqualify them that they are alive when it's really the other way around. They're more alive than we are, and that's why they don't have to eat and they don't have to procreate. A level above us, far above us. Try to stay with me now. The Earth has a magnetic field, and without it, there would be no life on Earth. The sun has a magnetic field. Without it, there would be no life on Earth. I maintain that the sun is a living entity, dies every day and rises again metaphorically. So these are literally called celestial bodies. I would argue that the moon falls within the Earth's atmosphere, well within the limits of the exosphere. And that's why the moon appears as a dead rock. It's in the sky, not proper outer space. Whereas all the rest of these are in proper outer space. Understanding that the Bible labels the sky as the first heaven, and paradise, where God's throne is, a place we can't see, full of angels that are invisible to our human eyes, lest they come down here and interact, is the third heaven. The second heaven is labeled the expanse, which is the same word as space. But it's expanding, so the expanse is a better word. If you believe in the Bible, you believe that space is the second heaven, and that God calls all of the stars by name, and that they have jobs to do in reality, specifically in regards to the Earth. And scientifically, of course, in the most practical way imaginable. I can show you how just by shining in the night sky, the stars have influenced mankind in a great number of ways. Matter of fact, we are still obsessed, NASA. As obsessed as the Sumerians were about the Anunnaki and the stars. The same reason the Egyptians were obsessed with the heavens. And everyone else has always been. There's a reason. The forces of nature, you say. I say, the forces of nature say it isn't so. And I'll know you're a liar. Just like particles in an atom, so are celestial bodies in a solar system. And of course, an atom is not a solar system. One is tiny and one is super big. Guys. And while science has moved away from materialism, mainly because light photons are not matter, and light is like all important here, We've moved from material to physical. Now they say everything is physical, and what they mean by that is that everything obeys the laws of physics. Understanding that things have different natures depending on how big they are, basically, how much they weigh, basically. For instance, things on the atomic level are so small, gravity acts differently on this level than it does on that level. On this level, it's a field. On that level, it's a phenomena or a force of nature. That things with mass bend the fabric of time and space. So the sun has a different nature than a human being, but I would argue that the magnetic field of a man and the magnetic field of a sun show that they are the same structure relatively, one being scaled way up. I have a metabolism. I argue that the sun has a metabolism. I have to feed myself from external sources in my environment. The sun burns fuel that is inherent to itself. All that material, all that fuel is what makes it a sun to begin with. Has no need to procreate or pass on its progeny. It's going to live forever. Has no need to eat. Its metabolism is inherent in its design. I argue that metabolism is evidence of consciousness, and to think that bacteria are alive and that stars are not is the most absurd thing I can imagine. Who are the gods then from every major pantheon, starting with Sumer? The funniest thing about the Fermi paradox to me is that it's completely false. We're looking out into heaven, into the expanse, trying to find life like it does on Earth, not realizing that this is Earth and that is heaven, and that life out there is not going to look the same as it looks here. That's a level above us. We're looking for another Earth out there. Where's the mankind? We're flying their ships around. Can't they hear us? Saying, well, there must be no aliens. Just what if? Just what if? We can see with our own eyes that heaven is teeming with life in every direction. And that maybe the aliens are just too big to communicate with us in the way that we're trying to communicate with them. Sillies. Try talking to a bacteria. Can you hear you? So let's talk about wandering stars, why planet means wanderer, and why it is exactly that they are wandering. A reference to their movement through the night sky through the years. The movement of the planets, which shine as brightly as the stars to our eyes, don't maintain the same dance as the rest of the stars. And of course, a modern astronomer will tell you, that's because they're in orbit in our solar system around our sun, whereas the rest of those stars are not. But instead that we are in orbit around the galactic center of the Milky Way, along with a bunch of those other stars, but that there's as many galaxies as there are stars in the Milky Way, each with billions of their own stars rotating around their own galactic centers, which are thought to be black holes at the center of those galaxies. That's just the spirals. I know, the ellipticals are spirals that collided with other spirals. Anyway, the planets draw out sacred geometry on the night sky, and that's very interesting, how that concept also scales. But the planets are named after the gods for a reason, namely because while their celestial bodies are indeed immortal, can't actually die. Change forms maybe. Well, as the story goes, they left those bodies to come down to the Earth, and had to. How are you going to bring that big planet-sized body down to the Earth? You can't. You got to leave that there if you want to come down here. But how in the world could an entity leave its higher reality and come down to a lower one? Well, it's very similar to the way that you play Mario World or Fortnite or Call of Duty or Battlefield 6. You can't get your body in that machine to go to that server. That's a digital electronic lower reality, a simulation of this one that we're in. Now, if you want to go play in that world, you need an avatar. And we figured that out, and we can do that. Video games are a pretty good example. Imagine a situation where you put the VR goggles on, but then you can't take them off. You get stuck in there. Similar. Let me say it clearly. The gods from all the pantheons are heavenly beings, aliens, celestial bodies, that left those bodies in heaven to come down to the earth, this lower reality, and be gods down here. And of course, men and women who ruled over empires added themselves to this pantheon as reincarnations of these dead gods. Where did these guys go after God flooded the earth? He bound them in chains and threw them into hell. Their immortal bodies are still in the night sky. In heaven. Look, Mars is only mostly dead. To Blave. His soul, according to ancient texts, is wrapped up in chains and thrown into hell, waiting for the judgment. They weren't supposed to do all that. So I believe all the gods are real, Richard Dawkins. Some of them are fallen angels who are bound in chains and in hell. Where's that at? Well, we could talk about the quantum level of reality, all the way down into the singularity, if you will, the bottomless pit, hell. And men and women who added themselves to that. They don't need chains, their souls are in hell too. And just as the days of Noah were, so shall it be in the future here shortly, where all of this is going to happen again. Celestial beings are going to get thrown down to the earth this time, and this story's going to go round again. But this time it'll be Satan and they will worship him as God. They've been begging the gods to come back for 5,000 years.